Welcome back to this series entitled The Lord's Gospel, and this is part 14. In the last part, we started talking about the promises made to Abraham and the relevance of those promises to us today. So we went through in Genesis 12 many of the promises. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So we went through all of those. That's quite a number of promises. I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's like 7 promises right there. But there's another promise in Genesis 12, and we might as well just jump to it, where he says in Genesis 12:7, to your seed I will give this land. And I believe there's a lot of confusion with respect to what is the meaning of this. Now, I want to say up front, and we're gonna go through all the passages that refers to his seed, Abraham's seed, okay? And you're gonna notice that in some of the passages, it's clear he's talking about physical descendants of Abraham, okay? And in other passages, it's not so clear. Now, the distinction that Paul makes in Galatians 3, and this is kind of like a heads up on what to look for as we go through these passages. I think it'll help. Let's just look at Galatians 3 real quick, and just kind of highlight the distinction that Paul makes with respect to references to Abraham's seed. It starts in Galatians 3:15. Oh, by the way, well, no, let me just finish this first. I wanted to clarify something in the last part, but anyway, in Galatians 3:15, he says, "Brethren, I speak in terms of human relations." This is something we'll talk about what this means about a man's covenant ratified. No one sets it aside or adds conditions to it. But here's the point that I want to highlight in verse 16. Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. Okay, now look. The thing that we want to, okay, I really didn't want it in yellow necessarily, but that's really the only child. Okay, so here it says, now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. And this is where he makes the distinction. He does not say, and to seeds, as referring to many, but rather to one, and to your seed. That is Christ. Now, I think there's a lot of confusion as to what's going on there. But I wanted to point out, just on the outset, that he's talking about promises made. Okay. Now, there are commands regarding Abraham's seed, but that would not fit into this category. This category here is, now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. All right. We'll talk more about why this distinction is important. But there's a distinction when in this verse here in Galatians 3:16, where there's a lot of things written about it, a lot of confusion. The distinction that Paul makes is he's speaking of those passages that contain a promise to Abraham and his seed. Okay, it has to be a promise. Okay. And that's when he makes the distinction. And we're gonna discuss why that's the case. And I hope I can be clear about it. But here it says to your seed. It says descendants, but I told you about, like, in the last part, every time it says descendants, the word is actually seed, and it's translated descendants. But that's not a good translation. And again, we'll talk about why. To your seed, I will give this land. Okay, now, on the face of it, it is a promise, by the way. To your seed, I will give this land. That's a promise. Now, on the face of it, there is not enough information. Okay. But there is more that this promise is spoken, again, repeated. In fact, it's repeated in Genesis 13, just the next chapter. Okay. So in Genesis 13, on 16, okay, let's see if I can. I didn't highlight these things. He says, I will make your okay, I almost made that mistake. I will make your seed as the dust of the earth. Okay. So that, okay, I'm sorry, I messed up. I should have started 15. Okay. Yeah, 15. He's talking to Abram. God's talking to Abram after Lot had separated from him. Remember that incident where Abraham and Lot separated because they were their herdsmen were fighting, and Abram didn't want that. So he says, okay, look, Lot, take your pick of the land. Take your pick. And Lot went ahead and chose the plush land over there near Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm probably not really realizing what he was getting himself into. But in any event, this is right after that. And God was speaking to him and saying, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and to your seed forever. Now, notice the forever here. That wasn't in chapter 12. But now we have this forever. That's a game changer. Okay. Think about it. How are you going to give Abraham, because it says I give to you and to your seed, how are you going to give this land to Abraham forever? That would mean Abraham would have to live forever for him to have eternal possession. And we're going to look at some other passages later that talk about possession. But I will give to you and to your seed this land forever. Now some people could say, well, all he means is that land will always be held in the line of Abraham. Okay. That's not what he says. I mean, he says I will give it to you. Now Abraham never received the land in his lifetime. So he never. Okay, so when was that promise fulfilled? Right? The only way that promise could be fulfilled is if Abraham was resurrected and was given an eternal life, okay, to live forever. That's the only way you can really fulfill that promise. All right? Unless you want to play games with it. But if you were just straight up, what the words say, the only way you can fulfill that promise is if Abraham lived forever. Because he died without ever having ownership of the land. Okay? He never held title or held possession of the land. Ever. So that wouldn't seem really like much of a promise if he says, well, unless you die until I give it to you. unless you die before I give it to you. I mean, what does that mean? And why would he even care if he was just given the land for his lifetime? Because the lifetime ends, right? And this is a spiritual man. He's always thinking about the hereafter. So I will give it to you, Abraham, and to your seed forever. I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your seed can also be numbered. Okay? So what do we learn here? We learn, first of all, that this land of Canaan, is going to be given to Abraham and his seed forever. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that his seed is going to be numerous. It's going to be filled with people. So, and this is where this is some of the difficulty. He's saying two things. First of all, he's saying the seed, this land is going to be given to the seed forever. So that would imply that Abraham would live forever and his seed would live forever. Okay? It has, both of those would be implied. When you just take the promise and say, well, okay, but the only way you can do that legitimately, fulfilling this promise, is that Abraham would live forever and his seed would live forever to hold the land forever. And we'll look at more passages to confirm that. But he's also saying that there's going to be many. So this kind of runs in the face of what we just saw. Okay, it can be confusing. Okay, to what we just saw with Galatians 3:16, when Paul said, he didn't say talk about seeds, he talked about seed. Like this singular was important. Okay, so just hold on to that and just kind of understand the dilemma that a lot of people are going to wrestle with, and we're going to resolve it. I believe we're going to resolve all of it soon. So let's just continue on though, and so we know that his seed is going to have a lot of members. There's a lot of members to his seed, and yet, and his seed is going to live forever, and his seed is going to possess this land forever. So we know all this, and yet Abraham is talking about making a distinction between the promises made to the seed of Abraham, not the seeds of Abraham. All right, as though he wasn't talking about Abraham's physical descendants, he was just talking about one person, because that seed is Christ. And so there's a lot of like, what exactly is going on? Okay, so in Genesis 15, let's just look at, again, looking more at the promises. We're just going to try to go through these promises. Here's the promise: do not fear, Abraham, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. I'm a shield to you basically is I am your refuge. I am your refuge. Okay. Now, I believe we looked at in part, maybe it's part 12, we're talking about the commands to Abraham, that the idea of Abraham going forth, leaving his worldly shelter, and relying on the provisions from God, was basically Abraham was using God as his refuge. Was making God his refuge. Okay, and doing that. When God says to him, "Do not fear, I am a shield to you," it's like God confirming that I am your refuge, right? Your reward shall be very great. As Abraham continues to seek God, and like it says in Hebrews 11:6, you have to have faith that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. So God has to be a rewarder of those who seek him. You have to have faith in that to please God. And Abraham had that faith. Okay. And so God tells him, confirms, your reward shall be very great. And we talked a lot about the promises already made in Genesis 12. All right. So now let's go to 5. And he took him outside. Now look to the heavens, count the stars, if you're able to count them. So your seed be. Okay. Again, a reiteration of the promise we just saw in Genesis 13, where he says, your seed will be many. There'll be many members. They'll be uncountable. Okay. There'll be so many. Stars in the sky, dust of the earth. He uses these kinds of illustrations. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him, and God reckoned it to Abraham as righteousness, meaning that this is the faith that justifies. And people say, oh, he believed in God. Now, again, we're going to talk about what that belief really looked like. It wasn't just a belief. It wasn't just lip service. He was willing to stake his life on it. He was willing to put that belief, so he exalted that belief so highly that he would put himself in harm's way. He would put his own family members in harm's way based on that belief. Just believing that God was his shield, that God had his back, that God was his refuge, that God was going to fix it, that God knew what he was doing. And he was just going to obey his commands and just believe God. Okay. But, remember, Abraham would obey God's commands, not commands that he didn't make him up. He didn't make up commands to obey. He didn't, it didn't come out of his own head. He obeyed commands given to him by God. It's important to make that distinction, because there's a lot of people that just make stuff up and go out on a limb doing what they think by their intuition or their gut tells them is right. And it's not. It's just not a command coming from God. Okay. So you have to keep that in mind. Now he says, okay, so there we have a reiteration of that promise that your seed is going to be many. Okay. On verse 18, we have another reiteration. To your seed, I have given this land. Referring to the land of Canaan. So again, there we go again. Again, a reiteration of the promise in Genesis 12 and Genesis 13. To your seed, I have given this land. Now, he doesn't talk about forever here. He just says your seed is going to have this land. Okay, doesn't mention to you and your seed here. Okay, so there's different iterations of the promise, but it's the same promise. So let's look at I wanted to look at 13. Yeah, okay. So here's another reference of Abraham's seed. Now, let's see if we can make a distinction here on how his seed is being referenced. God said to Abram, know for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age, and in the 4th generation, they, being your seed, okay, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. which is an interesting phrase, and I haven't really dove into that as far as, what that entails. But I'm just focusing right now on just understanding these promises to Abraham. Now notice in this statement, in this passage, how is God referencing Abram's seed? Is this a promise or is this a prophecy? This is more of a by the way, for your information, this is going to happen. Your seed are going to be strangers in a land that's not theirs. So this is not something that is part of an inheritance that's promised. Okay, and I forgot to mention in Galatians 3 when Paul's referring to the promise, he's talking about the promises of an inheritance, and the promises of even multiple members of your seed. It's like the stars of the sky and those kind of things, and that you're going to be great, and these kinds of things, which are promises of your reward. In essence, it's basically a promises with regards to your reward, Abraham, that you're going to receive. That's all referring to that. This is not regarding Abraham's reward that he's going to receive. Okay. This is just regarding something that's going to happen to his seed. So there's a distinction. And this is the distinction that Paul made and that we should make with regards to what it means. Because here, now you don't have to, by the way, you don't have to interpret this statement as saying the physical descendants of Abraham. It's true about the physical descendants of Abraham, but not all of them, by the way. We're going to talk about that too. Not all of them. But it's like the sons of Israel. It's true. It's true for the sons of Israel. That's what it's true. But the seed, you don't have to even talk about the sons of Israel if you don't want to, into interpreting this statement. This statement could also refer to the true seed that will also be given, that's also in on this reward that Abraham's going to receive with him and his seed, meaning the possession of the land. Okay. And I don't mean to get too detailed here, but it can go either way. You can talk about just the sons of Israel, which is not all the physical descendants of Abraham, by the way, but you can talk about that, or you can talk about the elect of the sons of Israel. Okay, that this would happen to them. And that would be completely consistent also. There's no problem with that if you were to interpret this that way. So they would just be like the remnant, as an example. What I'm saying is like the remnant of the sons of Israel, this will happen to them, which it will. So anyway, but I want to go through that, just trying to be thorough, just trying to go through it all, so no one's like surprised about passages talking about Abraham's seed that we haven't covered. In Genesis 17, let's talk about this. In verse 5, and I know there's thing we talked about this here. Walk before me and be blameless. We already talked about that. We talked about some of this. I'll establish my covenant between me and you, and we're going to talk more about that, those kind of things. But again, we're just focusing on some of the promises and rewards that regard his seed. Here in verse 5, no longer shall your name be called Abram, you should be called Abraham, for I will make you the father of a multitude of, and the word is translated nations. Now, it's also peoples, tribes. Okay. Now the way when this is reiterated in the Greek, how they would quote passages in the Greek in the New Testament, when it's reiterated in the Greek, by the way, they use a word that also can refer to foreign peoples. Okay, foreign peoples. So in this, but it doesn't really. You don't really need that here. This is the Hebrew word. Has tribes, families, peoples. All of those would work. They choose nations. That's fine. Okay, but understand that it does have to do with a people. Okay, a people. These aren't persons. This is a multitude of peoples. In other words, you're the father of a multitude of peoples. Okay, now I know we've discussed this before. And we'll talk more about that. But then he says, I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make peoples of you, and kings will come forth from you. Okay. All right. So what else do I want to highlight here? Well, I guess, okay. So what, okay. So let's just go through it. I think we've been through this before, but I want to go through it again. He's a father of a multitude of peoples, or foreign peoples, or, peoples that include foreign peoples, right? It could be also his own people that come from his body, and foreign peoples. So he's a father of these. All right, so what does this mean? If he's the father, then these peoples have to come from the line of Abraham, which is like a really strange thing to say. Because you're saying that Abraham's line is one people, but then God says, no, you're going to have multiple peoples. That will include foreign peoples, by the way, as the Greek will insinuate. And yet it's coming from your line, your physical line. So that's a very strange dilemma, right? And you're going to be a father. You're going to be anointed as father of these multiple peoples. Okay. Which means that you are going to be looked up to as the father. You're going to be revered as the father, as the role model. Okay. Because that's what a child does to a good father. Looks up to the father as a role model and says, I want to be like my dad. That kind of thing. So that kind of a role will be given to Abraham. And he's just anointed. All right. As that. And we talked about in the last part why God chose Abraham as opposed to others that had the same kind of faith. But he chose Abraham specially and elected him to fill this role. Okay. And we'll talk more about, hopefully this will all start to gel together as we talk more. There's a lot of things to say about it, and I can't say it all at once. So I had to kind of say it piecemeal. So these peoples, where you're a father of peoples, now what kind of peoples are we talking about? We've talked about this before, but do you think Abraham cares about being a father of a people that's rebellious and savage and maybe fearsome, but and maybe strong, but they're brutal. They're mean. They're unjust. Do you think Do you think that would be a blessing to Abraham to have that kind of a lineage, to be a father of that type of people? No matter how supposedly great they are and how much they accomplish and how much they dominate. Do you think Abraham would be pleased? No, he's a spiritual man. Any people that would be a blessing to Abraham as this, the context is, I'm going to bless you like this. I'm going to make you a father of a multitude of peoples. And that will, this is part of your reward. So if it's going to be a reward to a spiritual man like Abraham, these peoples need to be good people. These peoples need to be peoples that worship the same God that Abraham worships, that obeys the same God that Abraham obeys, that falls in line, walks in the steps of Abraham with regards to his faith and his deeds. You see what I'm saying? So these peoples are going to have to be peoples that are faithful to God, the same God that Abraham worships, and thus these peoples are going to be those that live forever. It doesn't really interest Abraham to be a father of a people that comes and goes. That's not a true blessing to a spiritual man like Abraham, who's always thinking of the hereafter, always thinking of the eternal things. A true blessing to Abraham when you're a father of multiple peoples, because Abraham plans to live forever. His people, any people where of whom he's a father, they need to live forever too. Right? See, when you start just thinking through this, it all becomes kind of obvious. It all becomes kind of clear what is really being said. There's a lot more being said that meets the eye when you think about it, the context of it, of God speaking to a spiritual man like Abraham. All of these things have to be true, because otherwise Abraham would not consider it such a great reward for temporal blessings. That's not what he's into. He's not into temporal blessings. So, this is part of, and just to clarify, and the reason why that's true is that's not a unique blessing. You understand, right? I mean, there's lots of men, especially in the days of Abraham, that are going to be a father of a large people, or we can even say multiple peoples if you wish. If you say that there's a line, he has, let's say, 6 sons, and each son has a line that goes and settles in one region, and they all go in different regions, and they form a different peoples, and they're a father of multiple peoples in that regard. But that would happen to many different people, different persons in Abraham's day. Okay? But those peoples, they come and they go. They may even be warriors. They may even, dominate the world at times. But their reign will end. So if that was all that was to it, if that was the only thing that God was promising Abraham, that's nothing unique, right? It's really nothing unique, because that's enjoyed by a lot of different persons that don't even know God will have that as a quote unquote blessing. People that don't even know God, people that don't obey God, people that God's never talked to. Okay. To be unique, you would have to have a people that lives forever. You would have to have a people that's just and righteous, a people that worships the same God that Abraham worships. Now that is a unique blessing. That's unique. That would be a great reward for Abraham, no question. You see, so when you start thinking about, just start pondering what's going on, you can understand That the only real possible interpretation of this blessing is what I've said. They have to be a people that lives forever. They have to be people that's just and righteous. They have to be people that worship and obey the God of Abraham. That's the nature of these peoples that are being promised to Abraham. That's what's unique about this promise and special and is a great reward. Because there's lots of other people, there are persons, I should say, lots of other persons that will have peoples that will come and go. The Amorites and the Hittites and the Philistines and the Edomites and you go on and on. All the ites are all peoples of the earth, and they rise up in power. The Canaanites, they rise up in power and then they fade. But they're all peoples of the earth that come and go. That's not what Abraham would consider to be a real blessing, is to have that kind of an interpretation of that blessing. Just a people that come and go. They might grow strong, they might dominate for a while, but then they fade, like all the other peoples that dominate for a while, and then they fade, like all the other kingdoms of the world. They have their day, and then they're done. So that's not a big deal for Abraham, because that happens to a lot of individuals. It's not unique, but this, what I'm talking about, is unique, very unique. It doesn't happen to anyone else. Okay, this is special. All right, so I don't mean to belabor it, but when you think about it, you understand that can be the only solution, the only true interpretation of these promises. Okay, and when you start to ponder that a little bit more, it leads to a lot of different ramifications about what we're talking about here. Okay, you start just thinking about it and say, well, and you start to narrow down how things have to play out for this to happen. Okay. So he says, kings will come forth from you. Well, again, same thing. What kind of kings? Kings that have their day and then they fade? That happens to all kinds of different persons. I mean, that happens to the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of people, of persons that don't honor God. A ton of them. That's nothing unique for kings to come out of you. So that wouldn't really be a blessing, would it? To someone like Abraham. Wouldn't be very unique if it was just like that. A king that comes and goes. No, it has to be an eternal king. It has to be a king that lives forever. Do you see? And so what are the ramifications? What are the implications there? And again, it all comes back to this idea of those of the grand ecclesia being king priests. These are kings that live forever. You see? But you see how, if you think about it and you just ponder it for a while, it all comes to that solution, that explanation, that interpretation. You really can't go any other way. Any other way doesn't make sense. It falls. It breaks. It doesn't hold. So this is, you got to have your mind thinking like this as you go through these promises. Okay? So now let's go to, I wanted to, 7 and 8. Yeah, let's go to 7 and 8. In 7 and 8, he says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your seed after you. Okay, so again, what's going on? It sure sounds like, on the face of it, he's talking about physical descendants of Abraham here, but he talks about an everlasting covenant. See, there's the eternal being thrown in there. Okay, and then he goes on to say, I will give to you and to your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. And I will be their God. Okay, there's a lot. Maybe you could even unpack this yourself at this point. Maybe you could even look at this and say, okay, what does that mean? What must happen for this to be true and for this to be a blessing to Abraham? Okay. How does this work? How come there's multiple generations? What does that mean? What's going on here? What does it mean to establish his covenant? What could that mean? How does that work? So you have to draw on different things about what it means, about how people are judged, about how people enter the kingdom, about how people live forever and have eternal life, and how all this works. Okay, just kind of put it all together and understand and here's something to consider. When he says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you, okay, throughout their generations or throughout their lifetimes, right, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you. This is the covenant he's talking about. The covenant that whoever this is, this, to your seed after you. It's hard because it's like I know where it's going, but it's hard to really discuss it without you really knowing where it's going. But to your seed after you throughout their generations. So it talks about the seed looks like it's multiple persons in the seed, even though Paul says the seed is one seed, Christ, and yet it's like multiple persons. So, okay, so what does it mean? But what does it mean to establish the covenant? All right. I'm gonna have to kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit to really talk about this. But it's important, I guess, to explain it while I'm here. What does it mean to establish his covenant? And the covenant being to be God to you and to your seed after you. Now, we've already looked at Galatians 3:16. We've already seen that Paul says, look, all these promises is really having to do with, and this is all part of the reward here, okay? And I will give to you and to your seed the land of your sojournings for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So this is all part of the reward that was be given to Abraham. So here's some things to think about. First of all, when we're talking about Abraham's seed, every Jew would agree it's not all of the physical descendants of Abraham. I mean, as an example, Ishmael. Ishmael was not part of this promise. Okay, was excluded, in fact. Well, first of all, Eliezer, who's from, he was from where? On his way to Damascus. I think he was from Damascus. And he was just kind of, he was going to be the heir of Abraham because Abraham had no children. So Eliezer would be Abraham's heir. And God said, no, it's going to come from your own body. Your own body is going to receive this promise. That'd be this promised son is going to come from your own body. Oh, okay. And so then he goes into Hagar because Sarah's going, I got nothing. Take Hagar, who is an Egyptian, and take her and see what happens. So then Abraham has Ishmael. And then, what does that mean? It's not the fault of Abraham that Abraham and Sarah aren't having kids. Now, everyone's looking at Sarah. Oh, it's your problem. Okay, because Abraham just came through. All right? And so he has Ishmael. And Abraham dotes on Ishmael, loves Ishmael. And Hagar, of course, is loving it and looking at Sarah and going, what a loser. You may look pretty, but you got nothing. So there, that whole tension starts to come about. And so anyway, putting that drama aside, so he has Ishmael. But God says, nope, it's not going to come from Ishmael. All right. That's not going to be the promised son, because Sarai was going to be called Sarah, and she was going to be the mother of a multitude of nations. We're going to see that. But, and she only has one son, the promised son, Isaac, right? So when we talk about Abraham's descendants, we're not talking about all his physical descendants. We're not talking about Ishmael, even though Ishmael received the sign of circumcision. And now I'm going way ahead of myself, but the sign of circumcision was given to Ishmael and to Isaac, and I can't imagine why they wouldn't be given to the 6 sons of Abraham that he had after Sarah died, and Abraham had a second wife, Keturah. Okay. And, if you want to look at that real quick, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah after the death of Sarah. She bore to him Zimran, Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sons. All right. And then they talk about their line. But it says, now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac. Separated them from his son Isaac. And they sent him to the land of the east. So Isaac was the promised son, but all of these are physical descendants. Now, obviously, I can't imagine how he would not circumcise every single one of these sons, because he was commanded to circumcise all of his household, his servants, everybody. And Ishmael was, and I think this is all, I think this is in 17. Yeah, the covenant of circumcision starts here in verse 9. You and your seed after you throughout their generation. No, that's not it. Where does it talk about this? I will establish. Oh, I guess it's in verse. Wait a minute. It is verse 9. Yeah. Now it's for you. You shall keep my covenant. Yeah, verse 9. God said to further Abraham, now it's for you. You shall keep my covenant, you and your seed after you throughout their generations. Okay? This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. So here, he's talking about physical descendants. Physical descendants of Abraham. These are physical descendants that he has. Every male among you, you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Okay? So here we have this sign of circumcision, the covenant of circumcision. But this is not a promise. This is a sign of the covenant between me and you. But this is not a reward for Abraham. This has nothing to do, this is not about a reward for Abraham. This is a command, not a reward. So he's telling him, when they're talking about the seed here, he is talking about physical descendants, which would include the 6 sons that he had with Keturah, right? So you see how it gets confusing when you're talking about Abraham's seed, because it's stated in different contexts. Here it's a command when he's talking about Abraham's seed. And then it says here, then Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all the servants who were born in his house, and all that were bought with money, every male among the men of Abraham's household, and circumcised the flesh of the foreskin that very same day. And he was 99 years old when he did all this. This is before Isaac. Okay? Isaac came when he was 100. And that time when he was given that circumcision, that command of circumcision, Ishmael was 13 years old. Okay. Anyway, the point I'm making is, what is the point I'm making? Just because they were circumcised doesn't mean the promise that's not what the Jews would consider to be Abraham's seed. They consider Abraham's seed to go through Isaac. And then not only Isaac, but then Isaac, and people say, oh, that's because it was Abraham and his first wife, Sarah, or his wife, his legitimate wife, Sarah, and the rest were concubines. So that's why, because Isaac was a son of Abraham and his wife. But then he has Isaac, and Isaac has Rebekah. Now, Isaac and Rebekah had 2 sons. But one was rejected, Esau, who was the oldest. And Jacob was the one chosen to go through, that this covenant would go through Jacob. This promise would continue down the line of Jacob. And so you see that every Jew would consider Abraham's seed to actually be the seed of Jacob. That's how they would see it. This is how God designed it. When it talked about Abraham's seed, and every Jew would say, it's not the seed of Esau. It's not the seed of Ishmael. It's not the seed of those 6 sons of Abraham that he had with Keturah. None of those. So it's not multiple seeds. It's just one seed. It's the seed of Jacob, aka Israel. It's the sons of Israel that were God's chosen people. See? That's how a Jew would see it. That's how they would describe it. That Abraham's seed. So they even admit, they would even agree that it's not seeds. It's not plural. It excludes Ishmael. It excludes Esau. It excludes the 6 sons of Abraham. It excludes a lot of physical descendants. And it really is just one seed, the seed of Jacob. That's how the average Jew would see it. So when Paul's talking about distinguishing between seed and seeds, that's not something that's weird to the Jew. They would kind of understand that as, yeah, well, we know. But they would say, yeah, we know it's one seed. It's the seed of Jacob. But Paul says, no, it's the seed of Christ. And so that's where we have to get to. We have to figure out what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean? So the Jew would say, no, it's the seed of Jacob, all the physical descendants of Jacob. And then Paul would say, no, that's not what God intended. It was the seed of Christ. And so it's a very quick aside that Paul talks about, but it's much harder for us to kind of get our head around it and to start, okay, what would a Jew be saying? Well, how would other people see this, understand this? How would they think about it? And what is Paul actually saying here? So this is what we're trying to accomplish, and it's not easy. I hope you bear with me, because this is not something that you're going to easily just grasp quickly. You're going to have to kind of think about it, okay, a little bit. But you can see that the promises all talk about eternal possession, eternal covenant. And so what I wanted to talk about, and I know that I'm jumping around, and there's a lot of things going on that all have a part to play. And sometimes it's hard to explain these passages without going through all this stuff. But when he says throughout their generations, and this covenant being to be God to you and to your descendants, or to your seed after you, let me just say it this way as a spoiler alert. The seed is the elect. And we're going to get there logically, but the seed, as a spoiler alert, the seed is the elect. Okay, of that where Christ is in the physical line of Abraham, but then Christ, after his work, who had no children, but after his work spawned automatically a seed. After his finished work, he spawned, and we're going to get to that passage, but you're just going to have to just bear with me a little bit. He spawned just automatically, just rose up instantaneously a seed of Christ, a seed of Christ. And that seed of Christ is the elect. And when you have that as your understanding, and we're going to prove all this, but when you have that as your understanding, you can understand you can start to understand what this means. If the seed of Abraham, that all these promises are given, you can see that there's one person that's in the line of Abraham, Christ, physical descendant of Abraham. Okay. But then Christ, it looks like everything stops after Christ. I mean, it doesn't go any further. He doesn't have any children, but he does. But he does have children. And we're going to tie all this together. And it's not going to be easy. We're going to tie this together. It involves a lot of passages, a lot of ideas. But he does. He actually does have a seed. Okay. And this is illustrated in many ways, by the way, many ways. And you'll be surprised in the ways that this is illustrated. So how does he establish his covenant between me and you, Abraham, and your seed? When you understand that Christ has a seed, and it's a physical, and it's not the seed of Jacob, it's the seed of Christ that we're talking about, then all of the seed of Christ is the elect. These are those for whom Christ died. Okay, that's the seed of Christ. Okay, just take my word for it right now. We'll prove it, but take my word for it right now. Then you can understand, after you, throughout their generation for everlasting covenant, he's going to establish the covenant to Abraham and his seed after you throughout their generations. The seed only is actually revived. It actually comes into being after the work of Christ is finished. That's when the seed comes into being. And there's a reason for that. But this seed that comes into being could be those before Christ. It doesn't mean it's all those after Christ. It's all those that would live with the faith of the promises of God and have that faith of Abraham, and then everything, the work is finished upon the finished work of Christ. And then you have, we've talked about this before, but then you have this grand ecclesia completed. Now there's nothing more that needs to be sacrificed or worked. The only thing that needs to be done at this point is the idea that these elect have to bear fruit in their lives, because that's how people are judged, is by their deeds. You see that in Romans 2, and we've been through it. Everyone's judged by their deeds. So this reflection or expression of the elect is always going to come through this fruit of righteousness that is going to be expressed in their lives through certain acts in their lives. And this is established by God in their generations, in their lifetime. So this covenant that he is their God, okay, that they recognize him as their God, this covenant that he talks about to be a God to you and to your seed after you. Why does he say seed after you? Because the seed only comes alive, or is only it only instantaneously appears after Christ's work is finished. That's when this seed instantaneously appears. And we'll look at the passage that talks about that. But it makes sense if you think about it, what Christ's work did and completed this work and basically fulfilled the promises of God, and now these sins can now be forgiven that were kind of, there was a promise that these sins would be taken care of, and all these righteous people, these people deemed righteous and deemed justified before the eyes of God, but you still have these lingering sins. What do we do with these? How do we get rid of these things? Something has to be done. And God had to provide that provision, that lamb, that sacrifice. But once it was done, then the sins are gone. Then clean it up. And guess what? The accuser all of a sudden loses his role. He can no longer accuse because those sins are gone. They're gone now because Christ finished his work. So the timeline came, once that timeline had been completed and the sequence of events was completed historically, and Christ finished his work, all those sins that were promised that would leave now left and gone, and Satan was cast out of heaven. Revelation 12, we talk about that. They talk about that, how Satan was cast out of heaven with all of his minions, because there was no more role. There's no more place for Satan in heaven as the accuser of the brethren. He couldn't accuse the brethren anymore, because those brethren were now perfected in the eyes of God, because the sins were washed away because of the finished work of Christ. So once that was completed, that was done, Satan's cast out. And so, and the saga goes on, because there's more elect that have to express fruits of righteousness in their lives. That has to be done so that when they're judged by their deeds, they will be justified. And God will be seen as just. You see. And all of this has to take place. So this is what this means. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant. They will forever recognize Yahweh as their God. And the seed is multiple, even though it's only one seed of Christ. But it's multiple people, even though Christ had no physical children. There's many, many of the elect, more than the stars in the sky, the dust in the earth, that kind of stuff. All of that's true. And that's why they're all multiple. And so that's a spoiler alert as far as how to think about this. And I have to kind of do that to explain so that you can go, oh, okay, now I understand how this all works. I will give to you and to your seed after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession. Now you can understand why it's everlasting possession. These people are going to live forever, and these people can take possession forever because they are part of the grand ecclesia. They are one of those for whom Christ died, and they will receive eternal life, and they have the faith of Abraham. You see how I'm starting to gel together? I will be their God. But, okay, so that's kind of a spoiler alert. And so when he's talking about the rest of it, the circumcision and all that, he's not talking about Abraham's seed in the same way he's talking about it up here. Because this doesn't have to do with the reward God has given to Abraham and to his seed. This isn't about the reward. There's no everlasting life here. There's no everlasting possession here. There's no everlasting covenant in here. This is just a physical sign of this covenant between Abraham and God that he's making. Okay? And there's more to it than that. I mean, obviously, the circumcision of the flesh is a reflection of the circumcision of the heart. And there's, let's see, do I want to go into that? Now I want to also state, just again, and I hope I'm not throwing too much, but this doesn't mean that there won't be what I've just said, everything I've said, that there won't be a people of God consisting of physical descendants of Abraham. Everything I've just said, because you can have a people of God being physical descendants of Abraham that are also the seed of Christ, right? You can have both. You can have a people of God, or a people, a physical descendants of Abraham, a generation of Abraham, and generations following, by the way. You can have a generation that are also, every member of that generation are also among the seed of Christ. Okay, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. It will happen, I believe. I believe it will happen. And a lot of the reasons why I say that is because of, in Deuteronomy 30, they talk about the restoration of Israel. And that's all in the context of the physical descendants, the sons of Israel. He's talking to the sons of Israel there. And he's talking about their physical descendants, that there will be a day when these sons of Israel will be reunited. And there's a lot of other passages that talk about it, by the way. It's not just Deuteronomy 30. And I think I have a list somewhere. But I wanted to throw that out too. These are all things that you have to kind of consider and remember. And this again, the idea of Christ having a seed, this is consistent with what Christ says in Matthew 12, where he says, "Who is my mother? Who's my brothers?" And stretching out his hands towards his disciples, he said, "Behold my mother and my brothers." He's talking about those. It says, "For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother, sister, and mother." So there, he's describing a household over which he is the head. Okay, but he's describing a household as though it was his seed. Okay, and it's a spiritual household, but considered a seed of Christ. And we'll look at the passages that talk about this very, very plainly in the Old Testament. Okay, so all of that is consistent, and the idea if you're Abraham's children, if you are one of his seed, you do the deeds of Abraham. When he said that in John 8, verse 39. Okay. that's all consistent with what this idea of Abraham's seed and what it means. But don't get confused when you're dealing with other contexts of Abraham's seed, with it, like the sign of circumcision, as one example, or the declaration that his physical descendants are going to be enslaved and they're going to come back and all that for 400 years, and gives us timelines and all that, talking about the sons of Israel. When he's talking about Abraham's seed in a context other than the rewards of Abraham, it's different. He could be describing the physical descendants, but even in that context, when he's talking about them going to Egypt and being enslaved and stuff, those were just the sons of Israel, sons of Jacob. They weren't completely all physical descendants. So every Jew would even recognize that and agree with that. So the idea that it's not all physical descendants of Abraham, it's not all the seeds of Abraham, so to speak. It's not the seeds of Ishmael, the seeds of Esau, the seeds of the 6 sons. That's common knowledge to any Jew. They would just say the one seed is the seed of Jacob. Whereas Paul is saying, no, not quite. Actually, the one seed is the seed of Christ. That's the difference. That's the rub. And we'll talk more, because there's also the ideas of he's a father of multiple peoples and stuff like that. See, what else do I need to? That took a while. Okay, so multiple generations is obedience. Okay, all right. Multiple members, right. I'll be their God. Okay, let's just look at let's look at a couple of other passages just to kind of, confirm some of this stuff. In Titus 2:14, he says, he's talking about Christ Jesus, who gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed and to purify for himself a people for his own possession, zealous for good deeds. Okay, so this purification, when this happened, when he purified for himself a people for his own possession, that was when the instantaneous seed of Christ appeared. And we'll go into more. We'll show you a verse right on that in the Old Testament. But this idea that you have a people of God's own possession, this is the seed of Abraham that is talked about when he's talking about the reward of Abraham and the everlasting covenant given to Abraham and his seed, and the everlasting possession given to Abraham and his seed. This is this people of God's own possession. That's what all of that's talking about. Now, so the next thing I want to discuss is we're going to go into, and I don't think I'm gonna do it in this part, because I've talked a lot about, I've kind of given the spoiler alert. So I'm gonna go through Galatians 3 in detail. And not only that, but I'm going to, I'm going to go through Galatians 3 and branch out into a lot of other different things. Yeah, so let's save that for the next part. The next part, we'll go into a little deeper on this. We'll hammer it home. I'll show you the verses I promised I'd show you. And we'll just look at Galatians overall and just kind of, I don't want to rush it. We'll just go through it and just kind of get a better understanding of what's going on. But you have, at least, I've given you the spoiler alert on how this all works out, and now we just gotta kind of absorb it and look at the passages and have it confirmed, and you kind of go, okay, and it'll all click. Okay. And the reason why this is important is because the promises to Abraham are important. And Abraham is an important figure, a very important figure that we many times dismiss. We don't take Abraham seriously. And we don't study his life seriously. And as a result, we're in danger of cursing Abraham, of belittling him and his role in our salvation, to understand it. And as a result, those that belittle the Abrahamic faith and the Abrahamic life and his life and how he conducted himself, okay, and the lessons we are to learn from his life, many times they will be cursed. In other words, because they will latch on to a different definition of faith that is false. It's not an Abrahamic faith. And they go down the broad road. And you don't want that. You don't want to be a broad roader. So you have to really understand the Abrahamic faith, because that's the only faith that justifies. It's the only faith that saves. So you have to understand the Abrahamic faith thoroughly and take it seriously so that you bless him and honor him, so that you will be blessed. Very important. Very important. Okay. So that's why we're taking this slowly and taking and trying to do justice to Abraham, trying to represent him and characterize him properly as our father. Okay, as our father in the faith. Okay. So anyway, and this is, again, this is the kind of faith that saves across any age, across no matter what historical age you're in, whether you're pre-covenant, before the old covenant, whether you're in the old covenant or where you're in the new covenant, this Abrahamic faith, this standard, is applicable throughout all history as the one faith that justifies. Okay? And it will express itself differently. Yes, that's true. In different ages, in different contexts. The faith will express itself differently in every generation. But God will establish his covenant with his elect, where they will express the deeds of righteousness within their generation, within their time frame, their lifetime, depending upon what age they live. You will express this Abrahamic faith in the appropriate manner. Abraham had to obey the commands God gave him. Noah had to obey the commands God gave him, and so on and so forth. And we are to obey the commands given us in our age, in our time, in our generation. Do you understand? Okay. That's how God establishes his covenant with us, that he is our God. And it has to be established for you to be judged by your deeds and to come through and to pass and to enter the kingdom. That has to happen. Okay? So anyway, that's it for this part. That's it for this part. And this is part 14, and we'll go on to part 15 next time and dive into a little bit more detail about Galatians 3. Okay. And so until then, thank you for watching.